Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. Around the country, voters are increasingly skeptical of election results. In North Carolina, almost half of all Republicans say they have little to no confidence that their votes will be counted accurately. And while Democrats have more faith in the system, only half feel confident in the state's election results. That's according to results of a new WRAL News Poll out this morning. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been digging into the numbers and talking with state elections officials all week, and he joins us now. Will, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Will, the latest WRAL News Poll reiterated what we've been hearing in the past few years, lower trust in the electoral process. What did the numbers tell us?
Yeah, the numbers told us that overall, a majority of voters say that they have either some or full confidence in the elections, but it's a smaller number who say that they have full confidence. There are a decent amount of people who say, well, I'm not going to say I doubt it outright, but I do have, maybe a few concerns. But really, the stark divide, as you mentioned, was on the partisan divide. We saw that 40% of registered Republicans say that they have little to no confidence in the election results. That's almost triple Democrats. 14% of Democrats say the same thing, that they have little to no confidence in election results. So this is just a pretty stark finding that it's broken down that politically.
What is the reason for the lack of trust, and why is there such a disparity between the parties?
Donald Trump. That's the answer in two words. Trump has spent years talking about, reasons why he thinks that he didn't win the 2020 election, but also even previous elections. I remember writing a story when he was first running for president in 2016 saying that the only reason that Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008 was because of immigrants illegally voting. And that's just, completely false. But he has spent years and years spreading these false claims of fraud, things that have been thrown out by courts, led to plenty of consequences for Trump and some of his attorneys. But despite all that, they have really taken hold among GOP voters.
Now, Republican state lawmakers passed a host of laws with the express purpose of restoring faith in elections. Do these results indicate that they've failed in their efforts?
I guess it depends on who you believe when you hear about the purpose of all of the new election laws that we've passed in North Carolina. You're right. Republican leaders have said that many of the new laws they've passed have been intended to restore faith in elections. Critics, on the other hand, Democrats and others, say that those laws were really just intended to amplify these same false claims of fraud. We, for instance, in North Carolina this year, we no longer have a 3-day grace period for mail-in ballots to come in after the election. And we passed that law entirely because of Donald Trump's false claims in the 2020 election that mail-in voting was rife with fraud. That was something that Republicans said, even if there were no indications of mail-in voting fraud in North Carolina in 2020, we still needed to change the rules because so many Republican voters were concerned due to what Trump had said. Other people said all you're doing is amplifying these baseless claims.
So if confidence in elections is so low, why has early voting turnout been so great, especially among Republicans?
Yeah, we are on pace to set records for voter turnout in North Carolina this year, and it's due in large part to higher than normal Republican participation in early voting. So on one hand, you have Republicans, telling our pollster that they don't really have a lot of faith that their vote is going to be counted. On the other hand, you have them really eager to get out and go cast their ballot. Those two things don't really jive with one another. And it could just be that for a lot of people, these concerns aren't really deeply held beliefs. It's a political slogan. It's something that you hear people in your party saying, but when it comes down to it, you still think that voting is important. You still think it's important to get out there, participate in the system, and clearly that's what we're seeing. In 2020, North Carolina set an all-time record for voter turnout. We had 75% of all registered voters participated in the 2020 elections. And so far this year, we look like we're on pace to be close to that, if not break the record this year.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear what elections officials are doing to combat election skepticism. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran about the latest WRAL News Poll results. Will, Hurricane Helene has disrupted elections in the western part of the state where there are a lot of conservative voters. How is that playing a role in election confidence?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, but we asked about this in our poll as well. Do you believe that people are going to be able to cast a vote in North Carolina, even out in these western counties that we've seen so much devastation in from the storm? And it was actually a higher percentage of people said yes to that question than to the broader question, do you think that the votes are going to get counted accurately? So when you ask just the kind of generic, do you believe in the integrity of elections, you get some people saying no. But when you ask specifics about, all right, how has the state been doing with this Western North Carolina response, you get a decent amount of voters who had said no, been skeptical on the first question, who say, okay, yeah, actually, I do think that the state is doing a good job of making sure that those Western residents are going to be able to vote. And, that is fair, because the State Board of Elections, which is controlled by Democrats, and the state legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, have unanimously agreed on plenty of voting changes for Western North Carolina to make it easier for folks to vote out there, while still keeping security measures in place, but making some changes to mail-in voting rules and things like that, just to make it easier for people who've been displaced, forced to leave their homes. We know there are thousands of people still living in emergency shelters. There's plenty more who are staying with friends and family, and so there's just been a lot of changes to help those folks ensure that they can get their ballot in, get it counted. And the poll shows that people are paying attention to those changes, those developments that we've been covering here at WRAL. There's greater confidence that the state has been doing what it needs to do to help everybody be able to vote this year.
Now, you spoke with Karen Brinson-Bell. She's the state's elections director. What is her team doing to improve trust in elections?
Yeah, this is something that, has been in the works for years to try to bring back the trust in elections that existed even just, a decade or so ago. And she said that they have plenty of different strategies for that. It's, they have social media ad campaigns, and they, the state board has amazing transparency on its website. For people who are really interested in digging into the data, digging into the numbers, you can find so much public information on the state board's website. And they've very purposefully done that to be able to point to that and say, look, we are being as transparent as possible, putting all of this information out there on the internet for anyone who wants to do their own research. But then also, hopefully, you will trust us when we tell you that we have done audits of the results and found, essentially no fraud. There's typically, maybe a handful of allegations of voter fraud in North Carolina. Not all of them get prosecuted, and it tends to be allegations of people on both sides of the aisle. So there's never really been a case where it would have changed the result of the election. Obviously, in 2018, the 9th congressional district was kind of an outlier in that case. We redid the election that year. And we've done many podcasts about that in the past. We don't need to relitigate that here. But in general, yes, they are trying to get the message out to voters that, look, we use paper ballots here in North Carolina so that when we do audits after the election, and if we need to do an even more intensive audit than normal, we have those paper records that we can go back and look at, and be able to ensure that the machines didn't change the vote count.
Now, former President Donald Trump, the Republican, and Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, they've been aggressively campaigning in North Carolina, where they are locked in this tie, according to the WRAL News Poll. Are themes of voter integrity popping up in their speeches when they come and visit the state?
Yes. Donald Trump was in Rocky Mount on Wednesday, and he was yet again advancing his baseless claims of fraud. He said in the 2020 elections, he would have won California if it had not been for widespread fraud there. And, California is a state where Donald Trump got around 34% of the vote in 2020. And so, he did not explain why none of his own federal prosecutors who were, in office at the time that this is allegedly happening did anything about this widespread fraud that he supposedly knows about, it's very clearly he's just saying stuff. But the crowd was eating it up. It was loud cheers. People roared with applause. And, so I think that explains a lot of these numbers that we're seeing here. Even if, people aren't necessarily taking it seriously all of the time, they at least like the way that he messages this. We've also seen, though, in these polling numbers, it was interesting. While I said there was only about 22% of Republicans in general who said that they had full trust in elections, if you look at specifically the question of who do you support for president, it drops to 20% among Trump supporters. So what that tells me, looking at those numbers, is that there's a small but significant number of Republican voters who trust in elections and are not supporting Donald Trump for president. And I think those two things are probably tied together. Kamala Harris has launched Republicans for Harris, trying to get those kind of never Trump voters, people who are turned off by the way that he talks about democracy and our electoral process. She's really made a big play for those voters, and we'll have to see if it actually works.
What advice do you have for election skeptics in terms of just understanding the process more, and do you think that even would help them in terms of developing trust in the process?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times when people are skeptical about the way things operate, a lot of times it's just you don't know how it works, and why should you know how it works? You are busy with your job, your family. Maybe you don't have time to do a deep dive into elections administration policy in North Carolina. So hopefully the work that we do reporting on things helps. Hopefully the work that the state board is doing on these things helps. But also just, you can go vote and you can see, everyone standing in line, see that it's, all sorts of different people out at the polls. And, the fact that also in North Carolina, just look at our results. We're a state that frequently votes one party for president, one party for governor. We kind of split up the other statewide council of state races. If there was if the fix was in from one party or the other, you'd think that you'd see more of it, that we wouldn't have as much splitting as we do in our state offices. So, like I said, there's plenty of data out there if people want to go and do their own research, or just let us do the research for you.
Going to be a very interesting week. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran for his latest on the WRAL News Poll. And for all of our coverage on the poll, go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.